Got it.
You know, right. The podcast that uncovers the origin stories of some of the biggest names in sports, media, entertainment, and so much more. Nick Durst here, along with Joe Calabrese. Joe, we are very excited for our guest today. I don't want to make her blush, but we'll call her a living legend. You can let everybody know who we have with us.
It's another
Uh,
way of saying old.
no, no, no. A longtime Olympics reporter, and for our listeners and our viewers, most notably covering the Olympics all these years, seen her on CBS Sports and NBC Sports. Andrea Joyce. Andrea, kind of let the cat out of the bag a little bit. You're not old. Don't worry.
Well, I am, but that's okay. I'm actually very proud of it because, we can just start by saying you will never have an older woman on your show who is still doing sports on national television. I'm the oldest one. So we're making a little history here today, and I'm proud of that.
Thanks. Nick, I'm thinking about that. Have we had anybody?
Nobody older. I'm the oldest one.
No, I
I'm
think
the
I think
oldest one.
second oldest is probably Mary Curlow.
Yeah, no, she's a baby compared to me.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. All right. Well, anyway, you look great for your age. Let's get this started. You graduated from the University of Michigan with the speech communications degree. When did you realize you wanted to break into the broadcasting field? Because at the time, back when you went to school, it was really more so for men than it was for women. So what did you when did you decide on that?
So I'm just going to warn you that my career before I did sports is almost like a sitcom. I mean, the way that things unfolded for me. When I was at Michigan and I was in grad school because I didn't know what else to do. And about 6 months in, I said, this is ridiculous. It's a waste of money. And so I dropped out of grad school. And I thought, I'm going to try and be in front of the camera. I'd always been a director or producer in all of the classes that I had at Michigan. And so I made a little audition tape, and I found very quickly that in the late 70s, the only jobs for women in television were weather jobs. I wanted to be a news reporter. I thought, I forget sports. That wouldn't even cross your mind. I wanted to be a news reporter. And I had 3 job offers out of college, and they were all out when I started sending tapes out and resumes, and it was all of them were to do the weather. So I thought, well, if I have to do the weather, and if I have to live in a small town and get started somewhere, I might as well live someplace good, right? So back then, before the internet, there was a thing called Broadcasting Yearbook. And the Broadcasting Yearbook, they probably have something like it online now. It gave you the list of all of the TV stations in the country and ranked them in terms of size. So I knew that I had to start someplace small. So I sent my resume to all of the places that ended in beach or springs because I thought,
Nice and warm compared to
what
Michigan.
the heck? So I sent to Daytona Beach, Palm Springs, Palm Beach. I ended up getting a job in Colorado Springs doing the weather. And that was how I got started. Now, was that my dream? No, of course not. But it was a foot in the door. And I mean, I show up at this place. It's 1978, I think. And I show up, and this is like, they have this giant map, like this gigantic map. I came up to Oklahoma. And if I wanted to do the weather this was, we didn't have a green screen or anything. And so if I wanted to do the weather in the Pacific Northwest, I had to have a pointer, and I had Velcro clouds, and I had Velcro lightning, and so that was what I did. That was my start. And, and then I went from there. I was only there for a few months, and somebody called me in Wichita, Kansas, and I got a job doing the news in Wichita, Kansas. And this is where my life really became a sitcom, because you guys have seen the movie Anchorman, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Right. So you thought it was a comedy?
Yes.
It sounds like a biography.
Documentary. It's a documentary. It is not. It's a documentary. That was my life. When I saw that movie, I told my kids, I said, this was my life. I lived this. I mean, the men at the station, their main job in life was to mess me up, like to get me to laugh when I shouldn't laugh on TV. It was Wichita, Kansas. We didn't have any big sports, and I was the co-anchor of the news. And the guy who did the sports had on Thursdays, he had a taxidermy segment. So he would have a stuffed animal, like, you know, something like sitting next to him. And so I would be doing a voiceover, reading copy with, you know, video going, and he would peck me on the shoulder with a bird. He'd just peck me and peck me and peck until I would start laughing, you know. And so they were doing anything they could because they thought, you know, listen, you look back on it now through a different lens and you say, gee, was that harassment? I mean, you know, who knows? Like, you know, you just plowed through every day, get through it. You keep moving on, and you end up, you know, 16 Olympics later. I mean, here I am. but that was my life back then in the late 70s.
So you know, from there you're making jumps around the local markets like many people do. You get into bigger spots like Dallas, and you continue to move around. So for you, what was it like, you know, every few years, I guess, or so, looking for the next job, and how did you kind of just progress through those market sizes?
Well, it was interesting because when I was in Wichita, you know, of course, my mom called me and said, hey, I saw an ad in the paper. They're looking for hosts for this show called PM Magazine. It was sort of like I don't even know how to describe it, what would be on TV today, that it's a local magazine show that they would have evergreen stories that might be from around the country, but they had local hosts for this show. And I said, I
kind
can't.
of like Inside Edition, maybe something.
Yeah, but they localize, you know, they make it local with their own hosts. And she said, I think you should apply for this job. And I said, I'm never getting that job. I'm working in Wichita, Kansas. I'm not getting that job. And I ended up sending a tape and a resume, and they called me, and I made the finalists, and I didn't get the job, but the guy said, stay in touch. I ended up, you know, thinking, okay, I need to move on from Wichita. I need to go someplace bigger. And going back home was the dream. And I ended up back in Detroit. And then thought I would stay there for the rest of my career. But it was one of those situations where I was stuck anchoring the weekend news. I was never going to be anything more than the weekend anchor. And I got a call from Denver. So I didn't really look for a lot of jobs after my first job, which is so interesting. I think that does happen still in the business. People hear about you, or I don't know what, but there was someone in Denver who had worked in Dallas, a news director, and they called me and offered me a bigger job in Denver. I went to Denver. That's where I met my husband. And that's sort of where I started, you know, doing sports a little bit. I had done a little bit in Detroit. Like whenever there was a big sporting event in Detroit, like Tigers opening day, or when Michigan went to the Rose Bowl, I would always be there as the feature reporter. Like I would do everything but the game. So I would do, you know, the Rose Bowl parade, I would do the Beef Bowl, and I would do the, you know, the families and all of that kind of stuff. And so I was always that extra body at the sporting events, but I loved sports. I mean, I always loved sports. And so that was really fun for me. So I did that in the last few jobs that I had before I went to Dallas. And Dallas was where I really, really switched to. And the reason why I went to Dallas is because my husband got a job with CBS News, with the network, and he was based in Dallas. And so I moved with him. First time in my life I had ever moved without a job, but it worked out.
Sure it did. And word of mouth.
You want to hear the story of how I got my job in sports?
Yeah, go ahead.
Because this is another one of those, like my husband keeps saying, you know, you have to write this book, right? I don't think I'm famous enough to write a book, but it is a pretty funny story. So again, I'm in Dallas, and every time that, you know, when it's the Texas OU game, I'm out there doing all the extra sideline, you know, whatever stories. And this one day in the sports department, they were really shorthanded. And one guy was giving a speech that night. Somebody called in sick, and they said, can you go out to Reunion Arena and do an interview? The Mavs were playing the Nuggets. And they said, can you do an interview with somebody for the 6 o'clock news and then anchor the 10 o'clock sports? And I said, I've never done. And they said, we'll help you. Don't worry. And I said, well, who do you want me to interview for the 6 o'clock hit? And they said, anybody you can get, it doesn't matter. And I said, well, would you want Doug Moe? Doug Moe, you guys are too young to remember Doug Moe, maybe, but Doug Moe was this crazy guy who played in the ABA also, but he was this really funny coach. He was the coach of the Nuggets at the time, and of the Denver Nuggets. And I said, would you want Doug Moe if I could get him? Because I had met him, and I thought in Denver when I worked there. And they said, well, you will never get him because he doesn't talk to us. Somebody from the station made him mad once when they were in town, and he doesn't talk to us. And I said, but would you want him? And they said, yeah, don't waste your time. So, I go back to my little cubby and I get on the phone and I find out where the Nuggets are staying. And to this day, I kick myself that I didn't get the name of the receptionist at the hotel who put me through to his room, right? I mean, she changed the trajectory of my life. So I get through to Doug Moe, wake him up from a nap. And I said, hey, coach, I said, it's Andrea Joyce. I said, you may not remember me. I was in like this. And I said, would you do this interview? And he says, yes. I do the interview. Of course, the news director is back at the station saying, how'd she get Doug Moe? I thought Doug Moe didn't talk to her. So anyway, 2 weeks later, they offered me the weekend sports job. And it was partly like luck and timing, but also like a little bit of perseverance too. And the luck and the timing part of it being that I was at a place where this was the station I worked at was WFAA, and they had broken the SMU scandal when SMU got the death penalty for all of the recruiting violations in football. And so the news director really felt like, why don't we treat our sports department more like the news department? Why don't we have reporters in the sports department as opposed to, just a bunch of, the old stereotype of bunch of guys, slapping each other on the back, let's have a reporter. And he felt like this was a great opportunity to be the first in the market and one of the first in the country to have a woman reporter in the sports department. And the reason being that we're going to approach this like it's news as opposed to just that this is, a hobby for people. Right. So anyway, that's where it started.
Well, it's a good thing
Isn't that
you
crazy?
wasted your time, according to the news director, going for Doug Moe, because it turned out well.
Well, no, it wasn't the news director. It was one of the other guys in the sports
Okay.
department. The news director was the one who was like, whoa, like, yeah, no, but I mean, whenever I give a speech to kids, to college kids and stuff, I always tell that story because it's that you have to be true to your school. You have to be, you have to decide, and you have to be the one who's in charge. And sure, he may, I may not have gotten through, and he may have said no, but at least it's on me then, and I know that it's on me. But I'm a little bit of a pain in the butt, but.
You talk about luck and timing. Talk about how lucky the timing was for your husband, your colleague, Harry Smith.
How lucky he is?
Yeah.
It's funny because we were working together in Denver, and we were anchoring the noon news together, and we were friends. We were really, really good friends. And I don't know who started flirting with who, but somehow, we're playing footsies under the anchor desk, and every time he would, I was so professional, but every time he would say something, I'd be like I thought everything he said was hilarious. And then everything I said, he thought was hilarious. And of course, everyone thought that we had been having this passionate affair for a year, and we had not even kissed yet. But anyway, but we both had this rule that we would never date anybody that we worked with, and so much for that. So we got very, very lucky, though, the two of us, to meet when we did, and at that point in our careers where we were old enough to say, okay, we'll figure out a way to make this work. And he was working for the network in Dallas, and I was working for for the local station. And it's funny because, again, Harry is the one who keeps saying, you have to write the book. And we already have the title of the book, if I ever write it. And it's called Men, She's Coming In. And the reason for that is because I never let you guys talk. This is ridiculous. The reason for that is that one of my first assignments when I got switched to the sports department was to cover Cowboys training camp. And back then it was out in Thousand Oaks, California. And so I'm out there for a week, and we're doing a half-hour show every night. And I would go in the morning to the morning practice. I would eat breakfast with the team. They let us be there for the whole day. I would eat lunch with the team. I would be there for the second practice of the day. We'd be there in the evening. And then I would do my show from 10:30 to 11 o'clock at night. And I never left. And a lot of the other reporters who had been covering the Cowboys for 15, 20 years, some of them 30 years, they've been around for a long, long time. They know, you don't have to really be there for 17 hours a day. But I was terrified because, number one, I'm a woman. Number two, this is the first time I'm ever doing sports like this. And I just thought, what if I leave, what's going to, what if something happens? And everybody else knew that they could, pick their spots, and you didn't have to be there like that. But the coaches all saw that I was there and that I never left. And so every now and then an assistant coach would come over and give you a little tidbit, a little, whatever. Maybe they felt sorry for me, or maybe they just appreciated the fact that I was felt sorry for me, probably, that I was there for so long. So we were standing outside the locker room before the first preseason game down in San Diego. And I have no idea whether I'm going to be let into the locker room or not. I think that at the time, so this is 1987, I think, or 87. And I think that Gail Granick, she was Gail Gardner and Gail Granick, I think that she had been in a locker room. I think Leslie Visser might have been in a locker room, or maybe had been kicked out of a locker room. There wasn't a precedent out there, really. And so I was not sure if I was going to be let in or not. I didn't know what Tom Landry was going to do. So all of a sudden he's walking down the hallway with that hat that he had, and he sees me, and my knees are shaking, because I thought, what do I do if I don't get in? I have to still report and do my work. And he opens up the locker room door and he says, "Men, she's coming in." I said, and I went in. And then everything after that kind of, just fell into place for me. A lot of luck and timing. Then it became a popular time to hire women. And, if you did your homework and if you worked hard, you survive.
Yeah, and they're thriving today. Wanted to ask you one more question about the bouncing around stuff and word of mouth. It's become easier for everybody to hear about people working in this market, that market, job, that job, right? We ask this question a lot for people who are on our show. Do you personally have an agent or representation yourself, or have you just kind of always winged it?
No, I always had an agent. But and this is not dissing agents at all, because they do valuable work for sure. But for me personally, I always felt like I could sell myself better than anybody. And and again, it's that being in, not, my kids will tell you, I'm a little bit of a control freak, right? And so I felt like it was easier for me to put myself out there. And to this day, it sort of happens that way. I think that, agents are great. And for a lot of people, I'm sure when you're getting started, honestly, I'm not exactly sure how it works today, but, I'm sure that agents are so important for people who are just getting started, to get their names out there and get their tapes out there, or whatever. They're not tapes anymore, are they? They're reels on what do you call them now? I don't even know what you call them. I guess you call it a reel, something's real. Yeah. But I did always have an agent, but I don't know that an agent ever got me a job. I think that I was really, really lucky. I was always in the right place at the right time. When Harry and I moved to New York for his job, I had only been doing sports in Dallas for less than a year. And I said, wait a minute, this is great. I mean, I'm having a blast. This is so much fun for me. And I don't have to cover fires. I don't have to go to city council meetings. I don't have to go to school board meetings. I'm going to baseball games, football games, and I'm getting paid. For me, it was a dream come true. And I thought, this won't happen in New York, because I didn't really have that much experience. And I got to New York, and somebody called me from Madison Square Garden Cable. And, had read an article that somebody wrote an article about Harry coming to New York, and his wife was a sportscaster. And they said, why don't you come over here? And I said, okay, and I went there. And then the next thing you know, you're in New York, and CBS needs extra bodies for the NBA playoffs. I'm pregnant. I go and I work the NBA playoffs. And speaking of Mary Carrillo, one of my first big jobs at CBS, I was 6 months pregnant, and I was doing play-by-play at the US Open with Mary doing color. Wow. And when Mary does color, Mary Carrillo does color, it's very colorful. Oh, and I had been told that the only advice I had been given was, follow the Pat Summerall school of broadcasting. Less is more. Just, 40 love, go to a commercial. We'll be back after this, don't say anything. And Mary's talking about the legs of the players and and I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to lose my job before I even really get started. But to this day, she's one of my best friends. So it all worked out.
Absolutely love that. So what was it like working on your first Olympics for Seoul in 1988?
Wow. Well, that was I worked for ESPN on that one. You guys did your homework. I'm so impressed. I worked for ESPN, and ESPN was not the rights holder. It was NBC, of course. And that probably would be the only advice I would give people is, if you can, avoid working in the Olympics and not being a rights holder. So it's a little bit easier now, but boy, back then you couldn't get into anything, you couldn't do anything. I ended up again, you have to be resourceful, right? I mean, we were sitting there, we couldn't get into these events. We couldn't, our credential didn't do anything for us. And we wanted to do a story on Steffi Graf, because tennis was just, brand new as an Olympic sport. And so we found out that she was signing autographs at the Heineken House. So we went and we got in line with the camera. And when I got up there, I went, I did an interview with her, and she was not particularly happy with that, but this is what we did. I remember that it was really, really, really hard work. And I thought, wow, if I ever get to do one of these again, I would love to be at the network that has the rights. And it wasn't too long after that I was at CBS and got to work 92, 94, and 98, 3 Winter Olympics in a row for CBS. And so that was great.
So you did some work with ESPN and you covered the NFL draft.
I did.
Could you ever have envisioned when you're covering it then what it has become now?
No. And the interesting thing, I was still working at WFAA in Dallas when ESPN called me, and we were so close to Oklahoma, obviously. And they said, listen, Thurman Thomas, we think is going to go in the first round. And, could you go and be at his house? And when he gets drafted, you'll just do an interview with him. And so the day before, you'll do one hit, and then you'll do one hit the next day. My memory is that I did 30 hits, but I don't think I did 30, but I did about 10 because he didn't go in the first round. He did not go. So I show up on whatever day it was, Saturday, and I do one live shot out there with his family, and everybody's excited outside his apartment. And then we're in his apartment and we did a little preview piece, and then he doesn't go in that first round. And the deeper it goes into that first round, the more he's slumping in his chair, and that was to me one of the most heartbreaking. It was heartbreaking, and I don't know if heartbreaking is the right word. It was awful. I just remember thinking, I just felt so badly for this guy. And I thought, I just want to crawl out of here. I want to be out of his face. This isn't fair. This isn't, obviously it all turned out for him, but he took that day, what happened to him in that draft, and he carried it with him through his entire career. He's always talked about that. ESPN did a 30 for 30, or no, was it HBO? Somebody did a big documentary about that draft day for him. And I was interviewed for that. And he really did. He took that and he used that as motivation for his entire career. But your answer to your question, no, I would have never, ever, ever imagined in my wildest dreams that it would have led to what it ended up leading to. I mean, it was just, crazy, right? Lucky me.
Lucky you. But we live in a world now where a lot of the skill players aren't even going in the first round anymore. You can find them later on. The draft has gotten extensive, right? So that honestly has changed over time.
Right. But I think when we did that draft, I think there were maybe 2 live shots outside of wherever they were doing the draft, right? I mean, it wasn't like now where they're all over the globe. And, it's so much fun to watch.
You got the families inside now.
Oh, it's so great, right?
Party now. Yeah. So you were responsible, right, for doing some of those interviews in the early days when it started getting bigger. So you hinted at your time at CBS Sports. You joined CBS Sports. Wanted to talk about one of your most famous hits, the incident with Donna Weinbrecht's mom at the 1992 Albertville games.
That was well, this is amazing. You guys are bringing up some great memories. So that was one of those crazy. I was anchoring the Olympics, the weekend coverage with Jim Nance, and then during the week they would send me out to other sports, and so you had to bone up on those sports. Like you had to learn about all of these different sports. And so here's Donna Weinbrecht freestyle skiing We're in Albertville. It's snowing, like it's wet, heavy snow. It's freezing out. All of the French people are up and down the side of the mountain. People are drinking champagne and chanting and singing. And it's just this fabulous atmosphere. And it was so much fun. And I'm standing there, and boy, it could never really happen today, I don't think, because of the the Olympics have changed so much since 9/11, and also for that reason and for other reasons. There's so much more security, and there's so cautious with everything. But back then, I'm standing in the mix zone, and I'm interviewing Donna. She had just won a gold medal, and all of a sudden I get knocked out of the shot. I come back in, and she's standing there, and she goes, "I'm sorry, it's my mom." Her mom came over to give her this big hug. Her mom had no sense whatsoever that we were on television. We were on live. We were actually on live because it was a daytime, nighttime thing, and we were on live. But it was great. I mean, that stuff like that, it doesn't happen as often anymore because of security reasons and everything else. There are fewer surprises, I think, than there used to be, but there still are, though. I mean, there's still always surprises. Like, you sort of say, well, this is why I show up. This is why you show up for work, because you just never really know what's going to happen.
Absolutely. So how did you end up joining NBC? Was it something where they saw your Olympics coverage and they said, we got to keep you here with us when they got the rights back?
So it honestly, what really happened, there were a lot of changes at the time at CBS. Before I left CBS, they had lost the NFL. And those of us who were working there were working 3 times as hard as we had been, because they had those blocks of time that they had to fill. So CBS didn't have those games all day on Sunday. So they had to fill with boxing. And, so I didn't do the NFL. I did college football. I was the first woman to host the college football studio show. And, I did college football. And so so that was like a lot of weeks in a row that I was on the road, and, or I was in the studio in the city, but then I would be on the road for various games, Thanksgiving, whatever. And I had 2 little kids. When I left CBS, and I had to work so much more when they lost the NFL, because we had to do all these extra events. And I had an arrangement with my boss at the time where he said, you don't have to work every single weekend. We'll figure this out. We'll make this work. It's a change in management and different ideas and different goals and different plans and everything else. And they said, yeah, you got to work it. You got to work more. And I couldn't. I just couldn't do it. So I left and got picked up by NBC pretty quickly, but not to be like a full-time player. Like I'm still to this day a freelancer for 20 years with them. They said, hey, we've got, it was the Sydney Olympics coming up. So I left CBS in 99, I guess. And then 2000, NBC said, come and do the Olympics for us. And then I was doing NBA games, sideline reporting, and and just kind of worked my way into some other things there, but mostly Olympics. And then whatever Olympic sport I was doing, I would do those other events through the year. So at first it was swimming and diving, and I did some soccer, I did water polo, I did a lot of stuff. And then I, eventually morphed into, the gymnastics figure skating world, which has been great. It's been great fun for me. I'm 68, and to be my age and to be able to still go out there and do something that I love and that I have so much fun doing it, is, truly just remarkable to me.
So what are your favorite events and sports to cover? And do you have a preference between being a studio host, doing play-by-play, or working as a reporter?
Oh, I'd much rather be a reporter. Yeah, I do some play-by-play. I fill in for Terry Gannon when he's doing golf and he can't do a figure skating event. I fill in and I do play-by-play. But and I love working with Tara and Johnny in any capacity, and I enjoy it. But I feel like it's not my power alley. I feel like it's not. I've never felt as comfortable doing it as I feel like when I'm actually at an event talking to somebody and trying to get them to talk to me and try and get the other, we all sit there. I think that when we're watching these events, we can all see, what incredible athletes we're covering, and the and the amount, the commitment and dedication that they have put into their sport, and to be as great as they are. And we can all see that. And for me as a reporter, to be able to try and find what you don't necessarily see, what's going on in their head when the guy wins the golf tournament, and behind his sunglasses you can see that he's crying, what's behind those tears, like where's that coming from? And to be able to bring that side of the story, for me, has always been really, really satisfying and very gratifying. So I and it's funny because for a long time, when I was at CBS, I would be, I was the loser locker room person, so, and I actually loved it, because it was that sense of, like Pete Carroll, when the Princeton coach, in his last year before he retired, in his last game, and to be able to stand there with him, in this momentous occasion. And when people, when they've lost a game or lost a match or whatever, it's all of a sudden, sometimes it just all goes like this, and then they just talk. And I always found that I interviewed Aaron Crickstein the year that Jimmy Connors had that incredible run at the U.S. Open, and he was 39 years old. I think he turned 40 during the Open, and he beat Aaron Crickstein on Labor Day. And I'm making my way over to, Jimmy Connors to do the interview. And they said, "No, you go talk to Aaron Crickstein." I was like, "Oh no," and I just wanted to sit with my arm around him and cry. But you end up getting these amazing interviews with people who are so gracious in those moments. And I feel just incredibly fortunate to be in that situation. So a long answer to your question is I prefer the sideline reporting. The studio hosting was, it was fine, but I did that. I did it. And then I did, I've done all of that stuff. And for me, being a reporter is my favorite thing. I'll do anything, I'll pull cable. I used to always say, I'll pull cable. I don't care. But I don't, but I feel like my power alley, I feel like I'm at my best when I'm actually standing with somebody and talking to them.
Yeah, I do some broadcasting as well, and I always love when I get to do the reporting and doing the interviews. I always love interacting with the coaches or the players, whatever it may be, because it gives them the chance to speak their mind. And typically, otherwise, without the reporter, it's just guesswork. You don't know what's really going on.
Well, and if you approach that interview like it's a story, like the interview is a story. It has a beginning, it has a middle, and it has an end. And and you're telling a story with that interview, as opposed to just sitting, and regurgitating information. And I just also feel like the people who do play-by-play, who are and studio, who are great at it, are so incredible, and they have this incredible gift. And I think that for someone like me, you can only get so good at it, and then I'm never going to be Mike Tirico. I'm never going to be Jim Nantz. I'm never going to be, I'm just not that person. I don't have that skill set. So I tend to swing toward what I do best, and that's what makes you happy, right?
Yeah, and you've done a lot of reporting over years, especially with the big events. Covered a lot of Olympics. So for you, what was the most memorable games you've gotten to cover so far?
Well, in some ways, this last one, Beijing, was, memorable. I'm not sure it was my favorite, but definitely memorable, and just so surreal on many levels. I mean, Tokyo was different. It was a pandemic Olympics, and we were in quarantine for a couple of weeks, but then we were out, and felt more normal. Beijing, we were in quarantine the entire time. We were in a bubble and could not go. I could see my venue across the street from the hotel, and I couldn't walk to it, because then that would take me out of the bubble. I had to go, through security into a car, checked you with your credential in and out. Everyone in the hotel was in hazmat suits the entire time. You're there for a month and you never get to know anybody because you don't even know who they are. So on some levels, that was one of the most memorable, because it was so surreal. But I have to say that my absolute favorite Olympics was Lillehammer. And I think
controversial.
What's that?
Very controversial Olympics.
Lillehammer?
Yeah, with everything with figure skating and everything.
Oh, that. Oh, that. Oh, that little thing. It was funny because in Beijing we had the whole drama with the Russian female figure
Right.
skaters, and you know, and when it came time to go to the medal stand, and one of them wouldn't go and was hiding, and I'm back there and I'm trying to tell the director like where she is, and the cameras are trying to find her, and somebody said, boy, have you ever seen anything like this before? And I said, well, I was there for Tanya and Nancy, so
Right.
But beyond that, though, you know, Lillehammer was one of those picture perfect places. It was, they could never host it again because they've gotten so, you know, everything has gotten so big. Even the Winter Olympics, you know, which are much smaller than the Summer Olympics, still require so much more, you know, hotels and, you know, facilities and everything. And Lillehammer was this sweet place. Norway, the Norwegian people were unbelievable. It was just one of those magical places. There was a Norwegian speed skater, Johan Olaf Kaas, who sort of epitomized the entire Olympics. You know, he was this god. I mean, he was a hero. He was just this unbelievable speed skater and humanitarian. And, you know, they wanted to build a statue to him, you know, before, you know, on the Storgata before the end of the games. And no, don't spend the money. He has started this. I know I'm going to blank on the name of the organization that he started, the Red Ball. It's all about bringing sports to kids in countries that don't have sports, and taking money to Sarajevo. And I mean, he's just this, but he sort of became the face of the Olympics. And when I think of those games, I think of him. And what back then too, before 9/11, everything was so much more open. And so you would be in a little restaurant in the downtown area, just a little right off the Storgata, the main street, and athletes would just walk in. You know, people would just, you know, you would just run into athletes on the street. My favorite story. Do we have time for this? My favorite story in Lillehammer. So on our day off, Jim and I were hosting on the weekends. And then the next, they called us in Sunday night and they said, okay, tomorrow, they called it Black Monday, was the one day that they didn't have figure skating. And they said, we're going to cover the cross country relay like it's the Super Bowl. I mean, it was brilliant. It was brilliant because, you know, now we care about cross country in our in the US, but back then nobody cared about it. Nobody knew what it was. Nobody cared. And they said, but in Norway, it's their national sport. So we're going to cover it like it's a Super Bowl. So they place us all over, you know, somebody's at the train station, somebody's, you know, and I was in the tent village where all these people camped out in tents for days just to get a spot on the course to watch, you know. So it turned out to be this spectacular day, and we were all higher than kites, just so happy. And the end of the race, it ends up being, I think it was the Italians and the Norwegians, like after 3 or 4 hours of racing, the Italians edge them out by like this much, like a nose of a ski, and the Norwegians don't win the gold. They're all great sports though, right? So we're in this restaurant afterwards and we're just all talking about the day and how spectacular it was. In walks the Italian cross country team. These are all local. This is a local place, all Norwegians sitting in this place. And there's a hush. And I thought, oh my God. I mean, you can imagine, right? It's like being at you know, someplace and, you know, you're like, I went to Michigan. It's like Ohio State walks in, like, you know, what are you going to do? Like, you're going to bar them from coming in. They walk in and the entire place stood up and cheered.
Wow.
I mean, that was Norway, and that was those games had those kinds of moments. That was Dan Jansen. It was like, you know, like all of these terrific moments. So aside from the figure skating drama, there were wonderful moments, and it was just small and, you know, and felt like something that won't happen again. And it didn't. It really, you know, that was the last time. It was really trying to think. So that was 94. And then when was the next? You know, 98 was Nagano, was different, you know, for sure. You know, it was a little bit more spread out, you know, and even this next Winter Olympics will be really spread out, you know, in Cortina and in Milan.
Absolutely. So Andrea, in your life, your career, what would you say is your, you know, I'm right moment? So I mean by that, it's a time or place where you wanted to pursue something or maybe make some sort of shift or change. You asked somebody for advice. They said, don't do that. That's a terrible idea. and you were like, you know what? I'm going to do it anyway. And ultimately, you will see why it is that I'm right.
I don't know that there was, well, actually, I do have a moment that, and again, it was one of those moments that, you remember that regardless of what you're doing, you have it's your name, it's your face, it's your reputation, and you have to be true to your school. You have to work with integrity. I was doing the NCAA tournament at CBS, and Bobby Knight was, for some reason, it seemed like every year, the first couple rounds, I was assigned to his games, and he always gave me a really hard time. I mean, he just really did. He gave me a really hard time. And I was intimidated. I was not ashamed to say it, that I was intimidated by him. And he had a whole incident with Calbert Cheaney. I don't know if you remember that, where, Calbert Cheaney, there was a whip, and it was a joking thing, but nobody took it as a joke. And it was on the back page of the New York Post. And I had to ask him about it. And, so I was always in this situation of feeling like, we were not, whatever. Anyway, he wrote, there was a player of his, I think it was Steve. I'm going to forget his name. I'm so embarrassed. Anyway, someone wrote a book, and it was very, there were a lot of stories, a lot of Bobby Knight stories that were not flattering. And when we started covering the tournament, I'm blubbering just talking about it because it was so difficult. But anyway, they said, the SID said, you cannot ask him about the book. We were CBS. We had a sit down interview with him one-on-one scheduled the day before the tournament was going to start. And he said, you can't ask him about it. So I went to my bosses and I said, I vote for don't do the interview, because if they're going to dictate what we can and cannot ask, I think that we should just not do the interview. Who cares? There's a million things going on that first day of the tournament. And they said, no, we have to have the interview. And I said, I don't know. I just feel like we shouldn't do it. And I said, or we don't ask the question. We should just not ask the question. So they said, fine, do the interview. Don't ask the question. And I said, okay. And then someone suggested, why don't you just throw it in at the end and just make it your last question? And then it doesn't matter if he gets mad, because Bobby Knight had already the year before torn off a microphone in the middle of an interview with me and swore and, and whatever. So I was prepared for that. But I said, no, I'm not going to do that. If I give my word to the SID that we're not going to ask that question, I'm not going to sandbag them at the end and ask the question. I'm just, either we don't do the interview or we do it the way that they're asking us to do it, which is what we agreed to. And they said, fine. So this conversation happened in a hallway. So the next day we go to the game, and sorry, this is a long story. The next day we go to the game, and Bill Raftery says to me, Coach Knight wants to see you in his office. This is between the second and third games. They were the fourth game, I think, that day. And I said, why? And he said, I don't know. He said, and I said, I don't want to go. I'm in the middle of, we have 4 games a day that we're broadcasting. I said, I don't want to go. And he said, you got to go. He said, I'll go with you. Raftery goes with me. We go in the locker room. I sit down with all of these coaches, and I feel like I'm going to throw up. I truly feel like I'm going to throw up. And he proceeds to say, so the other day, a little bird told me that they overheard a conversation you were having about me. And I thought, oh, God, what could he could have overheard some stuff that, anyway. And he said, and he repeated what I had said about, not doing the interview, not asking that question, and blah, blah, blah. And he said, that takes a lot of integrity. And he said, and I admire that, and I respect that. And I'm telling you, I'm ready to throw up. I'm so nervous in there. Right. And so it was one of those times in my life that I thought doing the right thing was hard because I had to stand up to somebody who was above me, but at the same time, I knew what was right. And I'm sure that this person knew it was the right thing also, and may have been even just joking about it in a way, but they overheard me say that. And so then Bobby Knight said, and anything you want at halftime. This was back before it was a requirement that the coaches do those interviews at halftime, and he would never do them, and so he said, anything you need, Andrea, anything you want. So of course we get to the game and we get to halftime, and here's Coach Knight. I asked him a question. He puts his arm around me, he goes, "Well, Andrea, and he's so nice to me." And of course, everybody's back in New York saying, "What? What's going on here? Is this the same guy who ripped the microphone off the year before?" So again, it's a little bit like that, like my thing that happened in Dallas. Like you just, you stay, you stay true to, you stay on your, stay on your path, and you do what is right. And I think more than anything, I don't know if that answers your question, but I think that was a moment that it was reinforced to me that, no matter what happens to you, nothing is more important than how you conduct yourself and how people feel about you, and how they, you don't ever in your life want someone saying, "Oh God, here comes Andrea Joyce. I sure don't want to talk to her. She's a liar and she's a cheat." And, you stay honest. And, I think that was a reinforcement of that. Sorry, it was such a long story. Oh, such a long story.
Great story. Might have been the best answer we've ever gotten to that question. That's is the truth. Andrea, we thank you for your time. We really appreciate it. What we do here is we give our guests the last words. So it's okay. You've said a lot. Don't worry about it. You're forgiven. If there's anything else you would like to add on top of that, if there's anything else you would like to share or promote for yourself or anybody else, by all means, go ahead. Great stories. We wish you the best of luck moving forward. That amazing career. And again, we appreciate your time. Thanks again.
Oh, thank you so much. Thanks. The only thing I would say, because I'm not going to miss that opportunity. The only thing I would say is that if you have any young people who are, I'm sure you do, young listeners, that to me, the whole key beyond that whole integrity thing is to be curious, no matter what you do, whether you're doing a sports job, whether you're an accountant, whether you're a banker, doctor. If you're curious about people, it opens up your world and it makes you a more compassionate person. And I think that's what we all need. We all need to be more compassionate to all of the people around us who are not like us, right? And being curious. For me, being a reporter, curiosity has made me, I think, a better person.
Well said. Very well said, Andrew. We thank you so much for your time. It was greatly appreciated. We had a lot of fun on this show today. So thank you for joining us. So that's going to do it here for this episode of You Know I'm Right. For our very special guest, Andrea Joyce, my co-host, Joe Calabrese. I'm Nick Durst, and this has been You Know I'm